Ghost with Cats, Chapter 33. One Rule for a Ghost. The men looked out the hatch as three black SUVs pulled into the airport and sped toward the runway to access the hangars. DJ pushed the button to close the back. "Annie, can you fire the engines?" Derek Sr. quickly demanded. Yes, I can," she nodded confidently, climbing back into the cockpit. "Do it, and call the tower. Tell Carl we're out," Derek Sr. yelled forward as they rushed to finish strapping down the restored car. The triple blades of the twin engines cut the air as the giant 3,500 horsepower engines roared to life while Annie was talking to the tower. "We've got clearance," she shouted to the back. "Taxi us out," Derek Sr. returned loudly. "DJ, go see if she needs help," he ordered his son over the roar of the engines. "Dad, I don't fly these things," he objected. "It's no different from the seaplanes." His father's green eyes held that gleam they always got in situations like this. Determination, courage, insanity. DJ had never figured out what it was. So DJ just looked at his father like he was crazy, then rushed forward as the older men finished securing the car. He climbed into the cockpit. The redhead was lining up on the runway. She taxied to a stop. Then oddly, she messed with her eyes. When she looked up, the bland blue was gone, and her eyes were the richest, warmest brown he had ever seen, with gold and green of late summer mixed in. She wadded up, the contacts in her hand. "Are we ready?" "They're going to try to cut off the runway," Annie announced calmly. "They're almost done. Dad sent me up to help," DJ answered. "Do you fly?" she asked. He nodded, so she pointed at the co-pilot's chair, and he pulled on a headset. After he sat down, he looked down the runway. The SUVs were a third of the way down. "We're cut off." "Not quite. With our horsepower, weight, and the wind, we should have 75, no, 50 feet to spare, if I did the math right." She flashed him a grin. Her eyes were shining with the same look his father got. "What?" DJ exclaimed, shocked. "Dad always uses the entire strip to take off and land the Fairchild." "Did you ever hear of the Doolittle Raiders?" She shrugged. "Yes," he answered hesitantly. He had heard of his father's favorite war heroes. He was suddenly very afraid of this tiny redhead, deciding she must be as crazy as his father. The Doolittle Raiders did the impossible by flying bombers off the decks of carriers at the start of World War II. She grinned at him wider. "Then you know it can be done." "Are you freaking kidding me?" DJ blurted out. "We're ready. Take off now." Derek's voice came over the headsets. "I'm going to do a Doolittle launch," Annie announced, coolly, as though she were asking if they wanted iced tea on a hot summer's day. "Do it, Annie." Derek Sr.'s voice approved over the headsets. He sounded completely calm. Never looking over at Derek Jr., she ordered over the headset mics. "Stand on the brakes. It's going to take both of us to pull this off." She took a deep breath, then warned through the mic, "Hold on to your stomachs." They both put their full weight on the brakes while they pushed the throttles forward. The mighty engines roared deafeningly. "Now!" Annie snapped. They released the brakes, and the plane bucked forward, rapidly accelerating. "Pull!" They both leaned back, pulling the yokes evenly. The lightly loaded cargo plane, with the twin 3,500 horsepower engines, climbed into the afternoon sky smoothly and curved gracefully onto its flight path. Below them, The men in the black SUVs could only stare in disbelief as the plane buzzed over them. Together, the children of pilots turned the plane westward onto the less traveled 12,000-foot altitude flight path, cruising at 250 miles per hour. They grinned at each other. It was like they had flown together their whole lives. Derek and Pops climbed forward. "Good job, kids!" Derek praised them, squeezing his son's shoulder and hers. "Oh, I wish Daddy were alive to see this plane and me flying it," Annie giggled proudly. "James would be proud of you, sweetheart," Derek assured her. She looked at him in surprise. Then he explained, "I knew your parents a long time ago. You haven't seen me since you were 5 or 6. I'm sorry for what happened to them and you. Paul said I was to ask you about Rabbit Hole and Pandora. I read the reports, but I would like to hear your side. He also said to tell you he was sorry he ever doubted you." Annie looked out the window toward the horizon for a moment. Rule number 2 for daily life: do not dwell on the past or your pain. You did not die that week. She knew she could tell the story without breaking this time. She wasn't afraid any more. Over her shoulder, she asked, "Pops?" "You can trust them, Annie. Derek has saved the world himself at least a dozen times from stuff just as weird. Where do you think all my crazy stories come from?" The old writer winked at her. She nodded. She reached up and squeezed her left shoulder. If Pops and Paul trusted them, then she would. 7 years ago, I was working on a joint task force to protect the world's oil supply. I brought my fiancé home for Christmas to spend it with my parents. I didn't know he was the terrorist I was looking for. Annie started. Several hours later, when they were finally over Colorado, Annie had told them everything, beginning with the simplified version of her captivity and rabbit hole up to Matagorda. She explained about Pandora and the catastrophes blamed on as natural disasters that Pandora had caused worldwide over the last few decades. Annie was saddened to learn DJ's new bride, Autumn, had been lost in the Indian Ocean tsunami caused by a Pandora experiment. She told them almost everything about the Eloh, the history between their peoples going back thousands of years, and how they shared DNA. She told them how their culture was dying and about their pending civil war. She explained how Tall was trying to keep our world out of it, and how Bence was trying to get us involved. The only thing she left out was what happened between Sharon and Bourne on New Year's morning. She did not hide that she found her ancestors included Eloh, or that she had fallen in love with Tall after meeting him again after so many years. But she did not know how to explain that he had inked her, giving her a kind of tattoo engagement ring. So she said he had pledged to return to her after the war if he survived. Wow. DJ whistled softly. So you're basically engaged to a samurai Starfleet admiral who was trying to protect our world and his cousin's kingdom from homicidal space Amazons. And it all started because your parents wanted to build a better battery. His summary was outlandish but true. Pops and Derek both laughed. "I know. If I hadn't lived it, I would tell Sharon not to publish it. It's too crazy," Annie giggled. "Still not as crazy as some of the stuff I've been through," Derek admitted. Pops nodded knowingly, but DJ rolled his eyes. "Seriously, Dad, we know." Annie looked over her shoulder at him like he was rude, but then grinned at Derek Sr. She had read all of Pop's books, so she knew he was telling the truth and quipped, "The best myths are based in fact." Annie and Derek traded places so he could talk to the Denver International Airport air traffic control. On the ground, they unloaded the Bentley and waited for their fueling truck. Derek and DJ were flying back tonight because a storm was headed in and it would strand them for days if they stayed. Derek shook his old friend's hand. "I guess I won't be needing to have an adventure for a while." "You don't mind me writing this as your daughter's adventure?" The old writer chuckled, their breath steaming in the cold. "If I had a daughter, I would be proud if she were like Annie," Derek admitted. "Yes, but I think DJ is a bit broken-hearted. He was a tad smitten at first. Perhaps it is time your son's doppelganger had a new love interest instead," the writer mused. "She is the first to turn his head since Autumn died." They smiled sadly as they watched the two young people walking back from the terminal with sandwiches and coffee. They were talking excitedly about something. "He's still holding on to that day." "We both have a day we hold on to, and so does Annie. Maybe they can get past them together," the old writer suggested. "She might need a job between ghostwriting my books, and you can always use a good pilot." Derek chuckled. "That I can." "Seriously? They fly using neuro implants?" DJ asked. "To increase reaction time and maneuvering. Oh man, I wish you could have met Hoth. Their flight technology is amazing. Electromagnetics. It's so quiet," Annie answered. "Dang, that sounds awesome." He sounded envious, not to see it. She groaned as a swirl of snow left a few flakes in her hair and on her lashes. But her hands were full, so she shook her head and then blew up on her bangs. "I am never going to get used to having short hair," she grumped. "It's cute. You should keep it," he said, then blushed and looked away. "Hey, the fuel truck's here." Annie didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. The Bigelows waved goodbye half an hour later. Another hour, and they were over the Great Plains, almost to the Mississippi River. Headed back to D.C., they had 6 more hours before they would get home and have to face down the Omni-Energy Research Incorporated's owner. "You're quiet," the father said. "Yeah, it's just I finally met a really amazing woman. She can fly, she can fight, she's smart and funny and cute, and she's in love with a guy who is literally out of this world," the son answered, sighing heavily. "It just means she's not the one," his father responded wisely. "I know. Do you want ham and cheese or roast beef?" DJ asked, getting up to get the sandwiches. In the bag were sugar cookies he didn't remember picking out, and a note on a napkin. "Stay sweet. She's still out there. Annie." DJ smiled. Somehow she knew. He hoped to see her again some day, and he hoped it was sooner rather than later. Even if they were only friends, Annie had brought color and light back to his grieved gray world. He wished Annie could have met Autumn as he carried the food forward. Yesterday, Annie said goodbye to Pops and drove to a rental SUV to the southern end of the state. Pops had picked up her things from the hotel. She spent 2 days at his beautiful estate waiting for the weather to pass. Annie called Texas and sold her Galveston condo and her holdings in Matagorda. She made arrangements to sell her home on Lake Fork which involved handing over the keys and signing the deed over to the local veterans of foreign wars and her father's former co-pilot. In Kuchara, she packed away Christmas for another year. She cleaned the house, washed the linens, and tossed everything from the fridge in the trash. Everything in the freezer and pantry she hauled to the local food pantry. Father Lewis had driven her rover back to her house and left it, keys in the mason jar of bolts on the shelf. He claimed not to know how Miss Annie's rover got to the church, but he offered to return it. The police and government agents believed the old priest and left it to him. As they sat in the church office, a wig-wearing, frumpy-dressed Annie paid her tithe for the year. She also paid Jorge the next 5 years' upkeep for the cabin. He would board up the windows and check it monthly. She told them she did not know when she would be back. Father Louis, Jorge, and his wife Herlinda listened carefully as she vaguely explained about Bent's and the government being after her because of her parents' research, and how she helped some visitors escape them. When Father Louis asked for clarification on the visitors, she pulled the Bible off his desk and opened it to Genesis 6, then pointed at a verse. The descendants of Abraham believe this is who they are. They are back and about to have a civil war. I am hoping we can keep out of it, Annie explained. Ay Dios, he said, and that was all. Father Louis looked forward to a quiet final few years before retirement, but his favorite wayward parishioner just told him a celestial war might be coming. Pray for me, Padre. Pray for us all, Annie concluded. Will we see you again, Miss Annie? Herlinda asked. She liked the feisty little woman who saved their family and had gotten them citizenship. I honestly don't know. The cabin is in great-grandfather's trust for the next 109 years before it reverts back to the U.S. Forest Service. It is the only place I have left here, so if I survive, I'll try to come back each Christmas, but there might be a few years in between. I donated Grandpa Dove's place in Texas to the VFW. Almost everything else I sold off. Just be careful. If anyone comes looking around for me, there are dangerous people that want Mama's research. Jorge laughed. We survived the cartels, the anarchists, and the federales. Miss Annie, we will be fine. You stay safe. We will see you on Christmas Eve, or we will light a candle for you. Carefully, she said goodbye to the people she considered some of her very few friends. Still looking her usual frumpiness, Annie turned in her rental car in Denver and bought a ticket on a flight from DIA to New York. She checked in, went through security, and got on the plane. However, when she didn't change planes at DFW Airport in Dallas, they started looking for her. Later, they weren't even sure she was the woman who got on the plane at DIA Denver. The security footage showed a mousy, brown-haired woman in the number 4 terminal. Then she wasn't. 5 days after she walked out of the Joint National Security Offices in D.C., Dr. Annie Winters-Dove just vanished. One rule for a ghost: be as invisible as possible. When visible, become invisible again.